Hey, ghoul friends, it's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I am still your host, and you are still listening to Susto, the podcast of ooky, spooky, scary stories. Welcome back. Thank you so much for returning. If this is your first time, welcome to the Susto fam. Welcome to the seance, if you will, based on today's episode. Right off the bat, I'm just going to jump into it. If you all have been following me on social media, that's at Susto Podcast on every social platform. You may have seen that I recently did my first in-person IRL event with the Austin Séance, and I am so excited to bring you this episode. We are very fortunate, very lucky here at Susto to have gotten such an exclusive, intimate inside look at some of what goes on during their sessions, their workshops. Right away, thank you so much to the guys over at the Austin Séance. You all make sure to check them out at austinseance.com. Check out their quarterly journal. You can sign up for that online. Again, austinseance.com. That's how I met these guys, as I started reading their zine, and then I started taking out ads with them. It's a really interesting publication. So again, I cannot say it enough. Make sure you visit their website. And also, if you are ever going to be in Austin, or if you are in the area, you can check out their calendar and information on tickets for other workshops. They do Ouija boards workshops. They do talking board workshops. Just to give a really quick description before the episode starts, so you know what you're getting into, is they gave a really great lecture at the top of the workshop, which is recorded. And then we did a hands-on portion, which is very interesting. We got to break into small groups and do hands-on workshopping with Ouija boards or spirit boards or talking boards, however you identify them. And that part was not recorded. And afterwards, they allowed me to do a short interview with them. And so, I mean, honestly, I could listen to these guys talk all day. I love what they have to say. I think it's so interesting, and they are truly some of the very few experts that I know of, and again, feel very fortunate and lucky to have been able to work with them on this episode. So with that being said, same other things as always. If you have your own scary story, video, picture, recording, anything, you can send it to me. You already know how, through email, sustopodcast@gmail.com. You can send it in a DM on social media at sustopodcast on every platform, or you can leave it in a 5-star review if you are able to do so wherever you are listening. Speaking of, you already know we have to appease the almighty, omnipresent algorithm deities out there. So wherever you're listening, please make sure to follow, like, subscribe, press any of those buttons wherever you're listening. That is the easiest way to support the show, and I truly do appreciate it. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it and enjoy.
Who believes in ghosts? We'll ask that. We'll begin with that. All right. Some of us. Who's actually experienced the supernatural? Yeah? Any skeptics out there? Anybody think it's all hokum? Man, this guy. Yes. Well, let me ask you this, and I think that we can all agree, right? I mean, who here has ever thought about, like, death? What it means to die? What happens to our bodies, our spirits, our soul? Right? That's a question that we've all asked. And it's a question that brings us together this evening for this workshop. This evening we're going to be talking about Ouija boards, talking boards. My name is Jake Cordero. This is my very good friend Albert Lucio. We're two parts of the Austin Séance. We are here this evening with the sponsorship. This whole evening is sponsored by Ayden Castellanos of the podcast Susto, which is a fantastic podcast.
Hi, hello.
There he is here this evening. He'll be recording a lot of our session this evening, and we may have some questions and answers later on, and you guys can free to ask questions as well. And that'll all end up in the podcast at some point. Again, my name is Jake Cordero. I am a journalist by training. During the course of my career, I've investigated hauntings in Fort Worth, Texas, cult murders in Mexico. I've been to Haiti, where I've investigated cult practices firsthand. Tonight, however, I'm going to lead a workshop with my very good friend, Mr. Albert Lucio. Albert has spent years as
Ghost hunters and
psychics. He has degrees in sociology and psychology, and so he's an expert in all things that go bump in the night. So in just a moment, Albert will talk a little bit about the history of spiritualism, seances, talking boards. I'll also sort of pipe in here and there. It'll be mostly Albert, but I'll pipe in here and there and talk about talking boards as well. We'll then, at some point, we'll lead a guided meditation. And
We'll
then
do some activities.
We'll do some activities.
Yeah.
We're going to do some activities first, and some hands-on activities. And these activities are designed to remove a lot of the stigma associated with talking boards and Ouija boards, because I know that there's a lot of stigma associated with these boards. I don't think the goal necessarily is to demystify them, but it's simply to remove the stigma associated with them. And we can approach the Ouija board in different sorts of ways, and I think, in fact, Albert and I may have a difference of opinion about the significance of boards and how they work. But at any rate, we want to sort of do our best to sort of destigmatize these boards, because they're fantastic tools, and I personally find them a lot of fun. I think that at some point in here, we may have to play it by ear a little bit, but I think we'll do a Q&A thing with Susto, with Ayden. So we'll figure that out when we'll do that when we get there. So with that, Albert, have I skipped anything?
I will fill in whatever you've skipped.
Okay, so Albert,
right.
Albert just
Hi.
gonna go. He's gonna
Yeah.
take over, and I'm gonna sit back here and I'm gonna listen.
Yes, so thank you, Jake. Thank you guys for having me. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the history, because this is important to give you guys context to what we're gonna do here, because there is a long history that's here that's oftentimes forgotten. And once you understand the history of spiritualism, seances, and talking boards, then it kind of makes it seem less threatening than what you probably see in the movies in popular culture. And so, like Jake said, my background's in psychology and sociology. So what I really enjoy about doing this and doing the seances that Jake and I've been doing, we've done over 400 seances for the last 7 years here in Austin. What I really enjoy is understanding how we experience the supernatural as individuals, how it influences us as individuals and as a culture, and how we influence it. And so that's really kind of where I come from in our background. Jake and I are very much like Fox Mulder and Dana Scully. So that's the best way to think about it. So philosophically, we may have some differences, but we both have the same interest and passion in what we're doing here. And we try to make these workshops approachable for everybody across that spectrum. So whether you are somebody who firmly believes that this thing is going to open gates of hell, or somebody who believes that it's all hokum, you're going to kind of meet middle ground and have a good time. And this is an actual workshop. So I'm not just going to talk. We are going to do hands-on stuff that's really geared to help us understand how to use the board effectively and how to get the most out of it. So that's really what this is. What we found is when we've done other workshops, or I've attended other workshops, you typically, if I just gave you the board, let's put it this way. If I gave you the board and I said, okay, go ahead and just start playing with this, you guys won't know what to do. You guys will also start pulling around in different directions. And so these activities are geared to make you guys a more cohesive group to work together in a very interesting way. So it's a lot of fun when we get to that. But we need to give context, and that's what I'm going to do. So earlier I asked how many of y'all have played Bloody Mary, and you showed your hands. That was actually a Victorian game. And the Victorians played it on Halloween night. On midnight, you would stand in front of the mirror and it would show you your true love. That was originally how the game was played. And then we added Mary, and it made it to a more interesting thing. And then later on, South Park had Biggie Smalls. So there's different ways to play the game. Culture changes over time. And that's really about the board too. It changes over time. I asked y'all how many of y'all had found out, played Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board. None of y'all had played it. How many of y'all, I'll ask you one quick one, I didn't ask this, how many of y'all ever wondered if your house is haunted? We always wondered. So there's a very simple game that you can play. You could take a music box, if you have a music box. If not, you could take your phone, pick one song and one song only, turn off all the lights of your house, shut all your doors, but keep one door open. It could be a pantry door, closet door, bathroom door, just one door. It's an idea for the spirits to be able to move, a space for the spirits to move in and out. Take a glass of water, put it on your table, because you should always offer your guests something to drink. And then, in the darkness of your own home, start the music. When the music is playing, you're going to say very loudly and clear, "Spirits, if you're out there and you can hear me, in a moment I am going to hide, and when the music is done, you can come find me." And then go sit and find a nice cozy place to hide and wait, and when the music is done, you can hear something or somebody and attempt to find you. You can go one step further. You can take 2 tin cans and a piece of string. One can on one side of the door, string underneath, because you're probably not hiding under the bed. And you can ask a question whenever you feel like the spirit or entity is close by. Put your ear up to the can and see if they reply. So it's kind of a fun game. So the reason why I brought this up, this game, is a hide and go seek game, right? And then making a telephone. When you think about who plays hide and go seek, who plays Bloody Mary, what demographic would this be? Children, right? Probably children. Maybe you guys will play tonight. But what's fascinating about the history of spiritualism and the history of seances is it began with 2 children. And it began with them playing a very simple game. It was 1848 in Hydesville, New York. It is just a place right outside a part of New York known as the Burned Over District. The burned over district was a part of New York where there was so much religious fervor that there was no more converts. So they called it was all burned over. This is where we get Mormonism. Methodists come from this area. We get evangelical movement that starts to come from there. We get the Shakers, were the first American spiritualists, psychics or mediums. We get all this religious movement that's occurring, and a big reason why. Lilydale's outside of that. Yeah. This is Lilydale came in after the spiritualist movement. It came in like late 1800s, early 1900s. But yes, and so it's what's happening in the United States at this time is that we're a new country. We're less than 100 years old. It's 1848, and so they're really trying to establish their own roots. And so we get a lot of very interesting stuff that's happening. But what happens in this log cabin is what really spurs the biggest movement, American movement of religion or spirituality, which is the movement of seances. And we know this because, again, we know the time, we know the place, we know the two girls were involved. We know them as Katie and Maggie Fox, or the Fox sisters. It was a cold, hard winter that March of 1848, and they were locked indoors for most of that time. And that's when they began to notice the knocking. Do y'all remember March of 2020? We all went inside our houses, duct taped everything shut. The New York Times of May of that year had an article that says there was an uptick in people reporting supernatural activity in their own homes because we started spending more time there. And that's essentially what happened. They began to hear knocking noises, about 16 days of knocking noises. Every night, as they would go to bed, they start to begin to hear this knocking. And it would just continue throughout the night until the early morning. And so on this one night, March 31st, 1848, they did something novel, something had never been before. The family, exhausted and tired from not getting any sleep, they prepare for bed. It's about 9 o'clock at night. The young girls are in their bed. The family had a community bedroom, and Mama Fox was in her bed, and John Fox, the father, was preparing for bed when the knocking began. And it's just this incessant knocking. So the youngest, Katie, decides to do something novel. She says, she just, in the home, just says this, and did that. Immediately, they got their reply. And this little moment began something that was amazing, because it was then Katie who said, or Maggie who said, count 4, just like me. And they got their reply. This is when Mama Fox, Margarita Fox, she started to speak to the noises and said, can you tell me how many children I have? And it would start knocking out the ages. Can you tell me how many years we've lived in this home? And it would begin to knock. Are you a spirit? Yes. Are you an injured spirit? Yes. Will you continue to talk to us if I get my neighbors? And so she went out and told her neighbors, and her neighbors told their neighbors, and so on and so on. They even got fishermen that were on the bank fishing that night. And they all crammed into this small log cabin just to hear this reply from the spirits. That was the first night. They also dug up the basement floor because in their communication, they created a system. They started calling out letters, A, B, C, and they would wait for that reply. They started calling out numbers, words, and they would get their reply every single time. That the spirit claimed that his name was CB, Charles B. Rosena, so there was that Charles I was talking about. He claims that he was a peddler passing through town 5 years earlier, and he was murdered by the previous tenant in that home and buried in the basement. They found bone fragments, they found buttons, they found hair, they found the water table, and the basement began to flood. That was the first night. The family left, the young girls, their father and the mother, they left, and people remained in that home until early morning speaking to the spirits. That next day, 300 people were at their house. They created committees to go around to investigate these noises, to see what was going on. They asked questions. This went on for a week. We know this because we have affidavits that were collected by witnesses that night, 4 days after that, by an attorney named E.E. Lewis, who was from the neighboring town. That began the movement of seances, the fad of seances, and it began the movement of spiritualism that was started by another man named Andrew Jackson Davis. And it was that movement that within 1 decade of that night, 6 million Americans identified themselves as a spiritualist. They didn't have a religious context at this point. Spiritualists believed they were scientists that were going to discover what happens to us after we die. Right? That's all they were. They were like onagronauts of the dream world, of the spirit world. They were, this is a time where science is kind of a burgeoning thing in the United States. Just like they're trying to establish their own religion, we're also trying to establish our own sciences. So we get animal magnetism or hypnosis, mesmerism. We get phrenology, We talked about this earlier. But phrenology, where you bump, this bump on your head means you're deviant. This bump on your head means you're a really nice person, right? We get these kind of new sciences that we're trying to establish our understanding of the world, and spiritualism is one of them. Within a decade after that, so 2 decades after the first night, 11 million Americans identified themselves as a spiritualist. To give context to that number, there was only 36 million Americans at that time. So roughly 1 in 3 individuals believe that you can commune with the dead. What's fascinating is there were 60 newspapers across the United States at that point dedicated to the spiritualist cause, about 300 groups dedicated to the spiritualist movement. Mary Todd Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln himself. Everybody knows Mary Todd, but Abraham Lincoln himself was also hosting seances in the White House. I have a very fascinating newspaper from 1863 that chronicles Abraham Lincoln leading a seance in the White House.
And was that to communicate with his son?
This was not. But yeah, they were having them before the sun. Yes, it was very popular. Congress was holding hearings about what was going on with these seances, with these noises that were occurring. My favorite little tidbit of history is Sunday school. Anybody go to Sunday school? I divulged earlier I went to Catholic school. So, all right. So if you went to Sunday school, the spiritualists had their own Sunday school. And in their Sunday school, small children would gather into a room just like this and probably hold what was the most creepiest event ever, but they would hold seances. This shows how innocuous it was. This shows how innocent it is, how it's not like what we perceive of it now. And so that's important to know. And ubiquitous, it was very ubiquitous. And it morphs as it moves across the United States. As it comes to the South, spiritualism comes to the South, it becomes evangelicalism, and it becomes snake handlers and speaking in tongues. As it moves even to Mexico, we get some movement from there that merges with some of the indigenous already religious practices. We get a lot of different things as it spreads across the world, it even goes globally. Some of the words that we get, seance, which is a French word, planchette, which is a French word, come from that. So this movement was a very much do-it-yourself movement. And so Americans were rolling up their sleeves and trying to figure out how we can communicate with the dead in a lot of different ways. And that's where we start to get our different devices. And that's where we get this guy. How many of y'all know what the name of this is? A planchette. Here's my trivia question. Are you ready? Which part of the planchette do you use to determine the letter, number, or word it is pointing at? The tip or the window?
The window?
Nobody seems very confident about this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's, yeah. Well, it doesn't matter because this was never part of the board. This existed well before the board ever existed, and it did not look like this. The original planchette was a top hat. And the Victorians would take a hat and put it on the table, and they put their hands on it, and the hat would move around and slide around. They put letters and numbers on the table, and that hat would just move in different directions with everybody's fingers on it. Eventually, they got rid of the hat, and they kept the table. We got a kind of a table like here. I bet we got one in storage that has little caster wheels, but a lot of them had little caster wheels on the bottom, little ceramic wheels. And so you would put that on the table, and people would put their hands on the table, and it became known as table tipping seances. And it would move around, sometimes jumping in the air. And then someone got a very bright idea of tying a pencil to one of the legs of the table, putting butcher paper on the floor, and everybody put their hands on it, and it would begin to write and draw on that butcher paper. That table became smaller and smaller until it became the planchette, or little table, or little board. And that hole, that's where you used to stick your pencil. And it would sit on the table with the pencil in it, and you put your fingers on it, you put paper underneath, and it would begin to write and draw on that paper. It was known as an automatic writing device.
When was the hat used?
It was the original thing. So this would be about 1850s, 1860s, yeah. And so, but it was already a Victorian game that was played, yeah. And so then it kind of morphed into something else. And so this was like writing in cursive. That's the way I see this, like an elegant writing machine. And then somebody, for some very dull reason, decided to add the board, because this becomes like typing with one finger, right? Here I can get images, I can get words, I can get all kinds of stuff. Here I get one letter at a time. And that's where Jake gets to talk about the board itself.
Yeah, I'm going to talk very briefly about the board itself, and then we're going to kind of segue into some exercises. This is just very brief little history about the board. Since we're all here for the Talking Board Workshop, I have to give a little bit of history. It's thought that the board was invented by a guy named Elijah Bond. And if you look it up on Wikipedia, you might find something about Elijah Bond inventing a board in 1890 or so. Fact of the matter is, there was the very first reference that we know about to something that is almost precisely this was the New York Daily Tribune in 1886, and they described a board at that time in the newspaper article that sounded exactly like what we think of today as a ouija board. It had letters across the top, numbers, yes, no, and so this was described in a newspaper article in 1886. So we know that this was a tool that was used commonly by spiritualists before anyone decided to take a patent out on the board. A guy named Elijah Bond took out the first patent on it. He ended up transferring that patent to something called the Kennard Novelty Company.
And what year was that?
That was in 1886 was the newspaper article, and then like in 1890 was the initial. Don't give me the line, but in 1890
okay.
was when Elijah Bond took out the initial patent, and then a little bit after that, a second patent was taken out by the Kennard Novelty Company, and there was some other people that were involved in that novelty company. They ended up kind of breaking up, but a guy named William Fold, who was their varnisher, who was 19 years old, ended up taking over the company. William Fold was a very ambitious guy. He apparently had already had a patent for a planchette that he'd already designed. He went at this sort of project full throttle. And so he took out the patent for the Ouija board that we know of today. And I think that some of those initial patents were called Egyptian luck boards, but they're exactly like the board that we know today. And so if you have a board, ever had a board growing up, seen a board, this is the traditional design. Now we have some boards that we're going to use during our exercise, which is a variation on this theme, but this is the board, right? This design. And so what you'll find on every board that sort of shares from this original patent is William Fold, and you'll see that name. And so that is the original board from very early in the 20th century. And so this design has been passed on from one company to the next. The board, I'm going to skip over a little bit, but I'm going to come back to it. The board eventually, the Kennard Novelty Company controlled the patent for many, many years. It was eventually, all the Kennard Company's holdings were eventually purchased by the Parker Brothers Toy Company in 1966. And then in 1967, the Ouija board became the #1 selling board game in America. It outsold Monopoly for that year. And so anybody of my age that has sort of long-term memory will remember a time when everyone had a Ouija board. And people played with it in slumber parties, and it's kind of weird now to think about, but for a while it was quite a fad. And there's been millions and millions and millions of these boards sold over the years. I'm going to rewind a little bit. The board itself, it's not simply a novelty. It's not simply a toy. It has a long, storied, fascinating, and important cultural history.
And the movement of spiritualism.
And yeah,
That's the thing, is the movement actually created a lot of, Jake's going to say it here, a lot of like artistic and literature. It contributed a lot to our arts and our literature and
it's all very much intertwined, right? And so there was a woman named Pearl Coran, I think, and she supposedly using a Ouija board. Pearl Coran was from Massachusetts. She was unlettered. I don't think she'd ever finished school. Supposedly using a Ouija board, she made contact with a spirit of a 17th century spinster named Patience Worth. And through that contact, this woman, Pearl Coran, created she was a very, very, a large collection of poems. She wrote plays. She was very prolific. And I think some of them were quite good, apparently, and she was not an educated person. And so this is a famous case of Ouija board inspired inspiration. A little bit later on, a woman from Missouri made contact with apparently the Samuel Clemens, the spirits of Mark Twain, and she wrote a book called.
Funny.
She wrote a book. It was
something funnier about it. Yeah.
A 250-page book called Jap Huron. And it was a big bestseller briefly until
the New York Times.
The Sam Clemens estate got very upset about it, and I think they took it off the shelves.
And so the New York Times actually reviewed the book, and in their review they said, it's quite scathing, They said, if this is the best that Mark Twain can do from the other side, he should respect borders.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Oh.
So, so there's that. And so, but there's a lot of the funny stories, but there's been some serious ones. Ted Hughes, a very famous poet, Sylvia Plath, very famous poet, had been inspired by the use of the Ouija board. And these are not hacks. These are very important artists. If I don't know if some folks are very much sort of familiar with sort of New Age movement. There's something called the Seth material, which is a very important document for New Age folks. That was apparently in large part inspired by connection through a Ouija board. There were in the 1970s, there was a guy named James Merrill, and he wrote a book. He wrote a poem. It was an epic poem called Book of Ephraim, and this it was a masterpiece. It was a beautiful, beautiful piece of poetry. It was widely acclaimed, and it was not like the New York Times review of the Mark Twain book. And it was a fascinating book, directly inspired by his contact with spirit guides with the Ouija board, and it won the Pulitzer Prize in 1976. So there is, it's unbelievable, sort of how spiritualism has intertwined with sort of arts, letters, the Ouija board as well throughout history. Also religion. I was learning Vietnamese for one time, and we had. My Vietnamese teacher was a member of the Co Dai religion, which was one of the major religions of Vietnam, and their faith was inspired by their oracle was sort of inspired by contact with the Ouija board. So it spread far and wide. And there's a lot of influence in culture.
Yeah, and so with that, there's a little bit of as with anything that comes in the culture, it's praised and then it's bashed, and so you see a lot of this movement that occurs, and so this happens not only with the Ouija board, which we'll say in a second, but also happens with the movement of spiritualism. Spiritualism was a very progressive movement, even in the 1800s. It was a largely feminist movement, and so it was...
abolitionist movement?
They believed in the abolition of slavery, they believed in women's suffrage, and so when the Civil War breaks out, there are pamphlets that are spread all over the South that talks about how the devils got into those Northerners through the movement of spiritualism to give them these ideas of like equality. So you have like these kind of things that are occurring, and we have one of the first women to run for president was actually
Victoria Woodhull. I think she was the woman. She years before Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Victoria Woodhull.
Yeah.
And she was a spiritualist.
We get artistic movements like the Ralphinites, who would do spiritualist paintings. So there's a lot of influence that's in there, but it gets demonified. And so Jake gave a couple of stats. So one was, we know that the board was patented in about 1889. So it's been in existence before that, right? And then in 1967, it outsold
Monopoly.
Every game board out there, right?
Even Monopoly.
Right? Even Monopoly, right? And so my question is, where are all the possessed children, right? If it outsold it, we're going to hear those stories. And so in the literature that you see, in the spiritualist literature and all that stuff, you don't see this concept or the idea of the board being something that's demonic or scary. We don't get that until we get Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist, and it becomes a MacGuffin, it becomes a tool, it becomes Chekhov's gun. It becomes something that is used as a mechanism to show that something evil has been brought into the world, and so this is by the method that it's used. And so it's oftentimes associated with that. In fact, one thing that's often misattributed with it is that you put it on a table. The original instructions had you putting it on your knees, and you never touched the planchette. It would move around on its own accord, but it also had little wheels, and so it would cart around on that board. So that's something, as we go into this, we think about it, it doesn't have that connotation in the movement of spiritualism. Young children would gather in a room and play with them. Again, where was the fear of that? However, there is one incident that is quite fascinating that Jake can briefly talk about before we get into the...
Yeah, I should probably find a creepier sort of horror story way of telling this story, but it is a good story. So in 1930s in El Cerrito, California, there was an incident with a family who apparently it was a young girl, her mother, some neighbors. They had all boarded themselves up into a house in El Cerrito, California, and they went crazy apparently for days on end, working with a Ouija board. And they went for days and days and days, and they became apparently increasingly obsessed with the board. I think that one of the people involved had lost a husband or something recently, and perhaps they thought that they were contacting the lost husband. Neighbors became concerned. Children went missing in the neighborhood. They called the police. The police came out, told them to they surrounded the house. So there was like a barricade situation. Someone yelled out of the house that they better stand away, or my husband will kill you. And this is the husband that had died like months previously, so there was no husband there present to kill them. But apparently they all went quite insane. There was a young 15-year-old girl that was there. She started pulling her hair out. She took off her clothes. It was all crazy. So they were all led out of the house eventually when arrested. There was concern that this hysteria spread throughout the town. So in our quarterly journal a couple of months ago, we wrote about this incident, about the El Cerrito incident. So we have some headlines that we came across in which the California Assembly decided that they were going to ban the use of Ouija boards statewide. There was investigations. There were headlines that the entire town had gone insane through the use of a Ouija board. This is all in the press. It's a fascinating story. And what I think is, and you can sort of ascribe it to mass hysteria or whatever, but this is one of these little tidbits, which Albert and I will disagree on, but I think it's so fun, is that in a completely separate case, El Cerrito's located close to Berkeley, in a completely separate case, a police officer, I guess it was like 5 days later, was arrested after he had gone insane, taken off his clothes, and he said he was heading out to Berkeley to kill a demon or something. And so there seemed to have been some weird possession nearby, adjacent to this incident.
No, I think he was going to El Cerrito.
He was going to El Cerrito, yeah.
Demon, yeah.
So, and it was very bizarre. So, anyway, so that's the one cautionary tale.
Yeah, but I mean, these are very interesting tales, and as Jake and I said, we have sometimes philosophical differences and thoughts about this, but again, this is something that when we go into this, because we're going to start beginning some of the activities, it is all with intent. So that's important to know. As you go in this, with the way that I think about it, when people ask like, "Are houses haunted?" or "How did houses become haunted?" I always reply back that houses are typically not haunted; it's the person. And so it's the energy that you have. If you have a lot of anxiety or fear, you're going to get back from the world, the universe, anxiety and fear. And so we are going to do a little guided meditation to kind of get us nice and calm. It's going to be really brief, just a breathing exercise. But that's when we get into the board and playing the thing. There's not a whole lot of scary things. If something scary happens, then we can always end the session, but we're going to do some activities that are just to help you guys to become, one, cohesive as a group, and we're going to break you guys up into 2 groups, I think, and then 2, to make the board more effective, so that if you decide to leave here and play on your own or play with friends, you kind of have a tool that's going to help you guys to do that. Okay?
So first off, thank you all so much for the session. It was really good. This is actually my very first session with the Austin Séance, so I was very excited for it. So I just want to know, you all did a great job of giving us like the history of spirit boards, talking boards, and other related info, but what are some of your personal experiences with Ouija boards and the paranormal, and how did you sort of find an interest in this field?
Albert and I both had interest in seances, and with how we discovered each other, because we were both interested in seance work. Albert has a history of working with ghost hunters, as he mentioned that earlier. I did not, but I think that all of us in the room probably have had sort of spooky stories, things that have happened to them, and so it sort of leaves an impression on you throughout life. As I got older, I've got family. I suppose I spread some of this enthusiasm to some of my kids. My daughter was sort of a very unusual kid, and so we would conduct seances in our house. when she was very little. And one of the tools that
one of the tools that we use is called a spirit cabinet, which is came about 1888 with the Ira and William Davenport. It's like a wooden box, and they would lock.
We own three.
Yeah, we own three of them. We use them in our seance, but they would take one of the brothers would go into the box, bound to a chair, and then a sitter, like one of you folks here, would also be bound to a chair, put inside the cabinet, and the doors would be locked shut and then locked, and then the seance would begin. And so, Jake and his very young daughter.
I built a spirit cabinet. I thought I had to have a spirit cabinet, and so we conducted seances at our house. And my daughter, like I said, seemed to have a little bit of a gift. Would sort of conduct the seances, and she was very little. And so she would get locked in the spirit cabinet, and we'd conduct seances. And so.
She's an adult now.
She's an adult now. She's still doing seances. So I don't know whether that scarred her for life or whatever, but I think she enjoyed it. And so she's still doing seances these days. But she was a little when she did it.
And I came from a different background. So like I said, my background in psychology and sociology as a kid, I loved everything went bump in the night. Like I collected everything. I still very much enjoy the history. Like I look a lot at the history of spiritualism. I think it's such a fascinating history. And after college, I wanted to understand more about how we understood the supernatural and how we experienced it. And so that's where I started working with different ghost hunting groups and going on investigations with them, understanding how they measured it and how they kind of explained it, how they understood it. And then I soon after worked with some psychics for a while, kind of understanding how they do it. I always joke, like in a seance, that I have no intuitive bone in my body, and I joke that I have a long history of bad relationships to show that. So, but that's it's just
I've been witness to it.
So that's my fascination, is just that way that we kind of experience this thing, and it really wasn't. We talked about earlier. It really was an influential part of our culture, and we don't teach it in textbooks. No. Yeah, and we should, because it really is a big part of our history. I mean, it was in the White House. Yeah.
I was just going to say, listening to you describe it, it reminds me of how it was sort of adjacent to religion, but without any morality. Or at least not the way we know it.
Yeah, it later on it turned into a kind of a religion. I would say it's closer to like maybe Unitarianism, where it's not. It's like there's a higher being or something is what they kind of see. So it's not like a really defined thing.
And the suffragism and the abolition obviously took a strong moral stance, but in general it wasn't defined by the Ten Commandments of Jesus, which is refreshing.
But you can also see how it gets demified by churches, because there's a decline in membership, right? If I could talk to my great aunt Tess, I don't have to wait till the next life to do it. Well, might as well go talk to great aunt Tess right now. So you see kind of this battle that occurs. But you could be a spiritualist and any other faith,
What's interesting is that there is some recent scholarship, scholarship of sort of the history of feminism and suffragettes and stuff. And that I've read a really interesting book called Radical Spirits. It's a really wonderful book, but I think that a lot of feminist scholars looking back at the history of feminism have been aware of the influence of spiritualists within the feminist and the suffragist movements historically. And they felt like they kind of give it short shrift, a little bit embarrassed by it. And the fact of the matter is if you look at the historical record, they're right there. They're right in the middle of the suffragette movement. The spiritualists are there, hand in glove, at that moment in history. And so these was a very important historical movement. And
it also positioned women in a powerful way at a time when that was just
and the one thing that Albert and I are aware of is that we are, in certain ways, we have to be very respectful, because we are to a certain degree sort of interlopers in a female space. And so there are often, we don't claim to be mediums. I think I'm a little bit more intuitive than Albert is. Albert is probably more intuitive than he thinks he is, but nonetheless, I think that when we a lot of the mediums historically, not all of them, but historically, it's been a women-led, female-led movement.
And they tend to be more. I mean, historically, one of the sad things is when there's like investigations by different entities, Scientific America, Harvard, different groups, as they investigated mediumship, especially physical manifestations. There's a time where in seance rooms they would create like all kinds of spectacles that would occur. It was women mediums that were more likely to be just brutally like ripped apart, and just they never recover from some of these investigations where a lot of male mediums would be celebrated even after like being caught doing nefarious things in the seance room, and that's also fascinating. And there's also some stuff about like the role of it's a role where, like you said, is empowerment, right? It's where you can have a job at a time that you couldn't have a job and be listened to because you have a voice, and that was a big part of some seances that would happen. Was there was lectures like the trance speakers, but you can go to a hall and you could sit in front of a group of hundreds of thousands of people and be able to like speak your truth, right? And because that was the big entertainment at that day. And that's not something that was necessarily afforded just to everyone. And so having that platform, I think was very empowering for women.
We got off the subject though.
Oh, sorry.
I love it.
We just started yakking.
Eating it up. Okay, so, I mean, the next two questions that I have, I feel like they go hand in hand, and you kind of addressed them during the session. But I wanted to ask if there were any common misconceptions about spirit boards and this kind of work, and if there are any sort of potential dangers or precautions that someone should use before using a spirit board.
I would say that, and I think I mentioned this during our session earlier, is that I think that Albert and I probably can, are guilty of the sin of being a bit too casual with the boards, because I do know that some people, they cause a lot of anxiety with a lot of folks. They do not, I don't think, cause Albert and I too much anxiety. But I feel as if that if you come in with sort of bad intentions, or if you bring something into the board as you're using it, that you may have, you could get sort of a creepy, spooky result. And so you need to be aware of that. We try to be respectful of faith traditions, and so if we don't do a lot of protection spells and that sort of thing, but I do know that a lot of practitioners sort of swear on that sort of, on those sorts of spells, and I think that's fantastic, especially if it makes the sitter feel more comfortable with the board itself. Albert has some thoughts about this.
Yeah, I remember as a child I was a scaredy cat. Like I still am as an adult, I think. But I would always get scared of going out to the way back of our yard. My parents lived in a very large plot of land, and so I'd have to go to the back to get something or take out the trash. I'd be scared, and my dad would always quote, I think it's Theodore Roosevelt, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Just go out there, right? And I'm like, no, you don't know what's out there, right? And I think that is one of the things I think that it inhibits people from being able to have this kind of experience that you guys got to have tonight, is that like fear that we automatically have when we think about the board because of pop culture, right? And we all have somebody who has a story that their roommate's cousin's dad's uncle's, dog sitter once played with a board, and now they're committed to some institution as a result of it, or whatever. They tried to burn the board and then it was found back in their house. So there's these great stories that are out there, but I think that they also they can cause damage to this kind of this thing that is, one, it's just tradition. It's an American, it's an American instrument, right? It was the movement of spiritualism that spread across the world, and the seance was very uniquely American. And so I think and what made that movement so great in this thing is it was a do-it-yourself movement where you didn't have to be born with a special gift or innate ability or special powers. You just had to do what you guys did tonight, willing to play a game, and you can have some kind of meaningful result from that.
But I think that you had mentioned earlier when a sitter had asked us, a young woman had asked me earlier during a previous session about whether it was safe to work with a Ouija board on your own. I felt like the answer is yes, that you can do that on your own. I also felt as if you go into it with a lot of anxiety, there is a good chance that you may get a very unpleasant result. And if you're using a Ouija board on your own and it starts going sideways, I would advise you to stop. And I do think that, and we talk about this during our seance sessions, that I feel comfortable with the use of the board, but with the asterisk is that I do feel like you can kind of take some of this stuff home with you. And so, you've asked about our own experiences. And I have not frankly had an unpleasant experience with the board per se. I have had some disturbing experiences in the seance room or after the seance room. And so I think that is sort of part and parcel with this idea that, sometimes you can take something home with you. I'm still here to tell the tale, so I'm not too concerned about it, but I've certainly had some fairly terrible nightmares on occasion after some troubling sessions in the seance room. So, I mean, that's about the extent of the badness that's happened when I think about just negative things.
That was actually part of my next question, was to ask if you all have either personally or maybe firsthand, so not your cousins, best friends, dog sitter's sister, but maybe your cousin or your best friend or yourselves, if you've ever experienced any sort of malevolent presence or a negative experience as a result of using this tool.
I've never had any any kind of that experience using this tool. I remember playing with them in high school with friends, and I've always found them as kind of fun and entertaining, but that's how we've always taken it. I think that when, like as Jake said a little bit, is if you come in with anxiety, that's what you're going to get out of it. I will sometimes tell people like that people are haunted, not houses, and I think that's the same thing with the board, is that if you come in with it, with that intent and that mentality, that's what you're going to get out of it, and that's when you're going to start to maybe connect those dots that you shouldn't, and then that could be dangerous. But I think I don't think I've ever had any.
Yeah, and I think like Ayden, my point was with the board itself, I have not, and what I have been. I mean, I think part of the reason why we can be a little bit cavalier about the use of the board is because we kind of do this for a living. And so sometimes our sound sessions are much more intense. Sometimes they're not, but sometimes they are. And so I've had, I felt like a few times where in the course of those sessions I brought something home with me, and that was sort of weird. And I think as a kid that I've had sort of weird, kind of fairly terrifying negative experiences, but not necessarily with the use of the ouija board.
The board is also, and this is I think same with pendulum work, same with tarot, same with a lot of this area where you're doing something with some kind of divination or connection is really it's really a tool. It's a communication device, but it's a communication device, I think, to really look inwards, right? So who are you really communicating with, right? You maybe communicate with something out there, but oftentimes I think you're also communicating with yourself, right? And so that can be powerful in its own way, especially if you're using something like tarot where you're reading, interpreting those things, and you're confronting those things. And so that's where I think the value of this comes from, and that's the important thing to take that into perspective, is who am I communicating with, and what does this mean to me? And that's a point that Jake and I always get into, which is a thing that we don't talk about demystifying, but it's there's a belief that there's something called the ideomotor effect, however you want to pronounce that, that's occurring. But then there's also a debate that Jake would make with me of, well, who's pushing you to do it, right? Is it external? Is it internal? And so that's also that thing, is you're sitting there and you're focusing and you're really letting yourself go. Is something taking that control. And there was a movement called Rapism that occurred where during the spiritualist movement, where spiritualists would kind of go in these catatonic states and they would tap. And they would do that. And so the idea was that it was the spirits that would going through them and taking possession of their foot to tap, channel things through.
Was it like Morse code or?
No, you would just call out like A, B, C, and they would tap, and they would, it was very fascinating. But it's called, but it's called Rapism, and so the medium would be there, kind of in a catatonic state, doing this. That was early, and that was about the 1850s.
Wouldn't it be great to go back in time?
And
I mean, there's a medium that Albert and I are very fond of, Marjorie Crandon. She also used a spirit cabinet, and she was this woman in Boston, and the stories about her are fascinating. And we just love to go back in time. We've made contact with Marjorie Crandon's great-great-granddaughter, and she's going to be writing an article for our next journal. But she has all these artifacts from her great-great-grandmother, and she's one of the most famous mediums.
Yeah, she had a huge feud with Harry Houdini.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, and we talked about sexism and all that sort of aspect within this space. And she had a big feud with Harry Houdini. Harry Houdini was going around debunking mystics. and he kind of met his match with Marjorie Crandon, but there is some criticism that it was quite.
Well, there's a situation in which it's suggested that he framed her as a way of trying to find something to prove that she was a fraud because he couldn't prove anything. And it involves a fold-out ruler that ended on the last seance. She did like 99 seances for this committee, and Houdini was a part of it. And he only attended 5 of them. And on the 5th one, it just devolved when they found this. And Houdini claims that she put the ruler in there so that she could manipulate objects in the room using her mouth, because she was enclosed in a box that he built for her that her arms could stick out of. She claims he put it in there to prove that she was a fraud. And then in the early 50s, somebody asked Houdini's carpenter about it, because he was president at the time. And he had his own ruler, and his response was, "Yeah, my boss told me to put it in there."
Oh.
But the suggestion generally was that, there seemed to be an undercurrent, or maybe not more than undercurrent, of sort of sexism with regards to that effort, because all the medium busters were guys, and they were, and all the mediums were basically women.
He had made the allegation.
It reminds me of Salem.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you were talking about that earlier, I was thinking, like
He had thrown the allegation. This is kind of an interesting story. He had thrown the allegation that she tried to use her womanly wilds to entrap him, and the word that he used is that she had come to his room to offer her applesauce. Because applesauce at that time was a euphemism for something else.
Not applesauce.
It wasn't applesauce. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But it does feel very Salem witch a little bit.
Yeah, just the hysteria.
So you kind of talked us through like the early evolution of what we know now as like a Ouija board, and how at first it was a table with the top hat, and then it went all the way to a board on the knees, and then now it's the board with the planchette. Do you see any further evolution of the Ouija board, maybe something that already exists that's not as popular? Do you think it's going to undergo this through the next century, another evolution, and it might look like something completely different, and people are going to be having sessions talking about?
I think I'm interested in, so everything changes with time, and I think there's some things that are going to be timeless. I think the talking board as it is now is probably going to stick around for a very long time, because it is a very interesting, very low tech, like there's no tech, it's just a low tech thing. But I think with the evolution of technology, there's going to be, I think there's already a group out there having AI write horoscopes. So I can only imagine like something like that kind of brought in fad-wise to kind of maybe taint the whole thing. But I think that as an evolution, I think it's met its end, but I think the components of it haven't. So I think I would like to see it as an automatic writing, just the planchette come back. But that's a really kind of hard thing to bring back, but I think that would be good. With this, it's very easy to understand, and I think that's where this is why I think it's kind of its final resting in that sense, is that you get the concept of very simply with an automatic writing device, just the planchette with a pencil. That becomes a whole nother kind of, I guess, dedication to use. It's knacky, you gotta learn how to use it. Hopefully it spells something. I don't know. Yeah. Where this is just fun.
I love the board, and I think part of the reason why I love the board is that, a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I love the board is that it is beyond analog. I mean, I think that you talk about the evolution of the Ouija board, and that it goes into the sort of the digital realm or something, and I think it loses all the charm once you're there, right? I think that you could have apps, and I'm sure there are already apps that exist, and there are other sort of modern ways to, we have an article, I think, in this issue about the Estes method, which is a sort of a more modern use of technology and seances and stuff. And I think that's great. It's fascinating. It's interesting. But the Ouija board is so 19th century, and it's so much fun, and it's so analog. Yeah. And so I think that in itself,
And it's tactile.
It's tactile. It's hands-on. Yeah.
And it's communal, right? Yeah. So we're all together. You can't, you can do it on your own, but it's really fun. That's why it is the quintessential sort of slumber party game, right? You get together with your friends, and you scare each other, and you put a candle out, and you listen to spooky music. I mean, what can be better, right?
Speaking of, the last question I have for you is, do you have any advice for, let's say, somebody's next slumber party, and they're curious about trying out a Ouija board? What piece of advice would you give them in preparation?
For me, I'd say, I think the biggest thing is what you guys did tonight, which is working on that group cohesion, like working on you guys working together because it's very easy to get to that board and everybody's their focus is different places. They're not focusing on working together. They're focusing on whatever it is. And so doing things that help you guys to kind of get into that same headspace together, to work together, I think that's important. I think having fun is important. And if you want to make it scary, make it scary. It's fine to do that. But I think that those are my big things, is getting that group cohesion, getting people on board to work together, having fun, and not really stressing about what's gonna happen when you get home. Then what's followed you home, because it's gonna be just your own imagination, I feel, for the most part. Until things
Jake's shaking his head no. Yeah, until the sulfur rolls in.
Yeah, it's all fun and games until until the ghosts haunt your house. No, I agree. I think the other thing that you can do just to make it super fun is you can put spooky music on, you can lower the lights, you can light candles. If you're over 21, I would, and
spirits begot spirits.
Spirits are out there. So I think have fun with your friends over, have drinks. We've done these sorts of sessions at people's house where it's like a pizza party, and then it's playing with a ouija board, and it's just super fun, right? And so I just think enjoy it. I think that some people will get gibberish, don't get frustrated, just sort of march on. The other little trick of the trade that we talked about earlier in the session is that sometimes you can, spirits, you're there, you might get a yes or no. Can you give us a sign, right? And sometimes it's as open as that. You can give us a sign, and then you may get 2 letters, G-A, and then you can start asking questions. Does this mean Georgia? Does this mean game? Oh, it's game. So you want us to play a game? Yes or no? And so you can sometimes ask very open-ended questions. And
have questions. I think the other thing is also have questions written down, because when you go to play, you get really excited about, I'm going to play this game, and then you don't think about what am I going to say during it. So just writing. That's why we give you guys questions, so you don't have to sit there and think on the spot. Now, if you have follow-up questions, go with it. Like as Jake is saying, once you get something,
just to let the flow go. Yeah. And then if you get some gibberish, to the extent that you can, write down those letters, and then you can go and look at them later on. In our seance sessions, we sometimes will get what on first blush may seem like gibberish, and then after we talk to the sitters afterwards, it's not gibberish at all. Someone has told us this is someone's initials. No, it's quite startling. So MQ. So anyway, so there's that as well.
Welcome back, and wow, what a ride. I had so much fun at this workshop. I want to do this again. I want to invite them to host like a birthday party or something, because I had such a good time at this workshop. And like I said earlier, I could just listen to them talk on and on. One more time, if you are in the Austin area, whether you're visiting or you live here, make sure to check out austinseance.com so you can check out their future events and ticketing information, or you can sign up for their quarterly journal. Again, all at their website, austinseance.com. I cannot recommend it enough. Thank you as well to everybody who showed up to the workshop. If you were there and you're listening to this, I hope you had as much fun as I did. I cannot wait to see you at the next one. And thank you to our venue, Yarrow and Sage, for hosting us. I also want to give a final and huge thank you to my friend Dan Segovia for helping me produce and audio engineer this episode. Shout out to you for helping me put this episode together. It was a beast and couldn't have done it without you. Some final announcements before I leave. I do have 2 more in-person events coming up. One that you've already heard of is the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival. You can get your tickets for 15% off using code Susto at checkout for your attendee and VIP attendee tickets. That is going to be on August 25th, 26th, and 27th. Check out the information at their website, truecrimepodcastfestival.com. I'm so excited for that. I'm going to be doing a panel with the Paranormal Putas, so make sure you check out their show as well. I'm so excited for what we have planned for everybody who's going to be there. It's going to be really fun. And aside from that, I'll be tabling the entire weekend, so I'm excited to meet other podcast lovers and creators creators and so on and so forth. Before that, though, I just got approval to post about it and promote it, but I am also going to be doing an event with the Austin Public Library. I'm so excited for this one. It's going to be so cute. This is truly kind of like my first live show where I'm going to be telling a story in person. I have a whole thing planned with a soundboard, so wish me luck. If you are in town, come and check it out. I'm going to be posting a flyer for this, of course, on my socials at Susto Podcast. It's going to be at the Old Quarry branch of the Austin Public Library on August 19th from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. It's an adult summer camp. There's going to be crafts, games, food, and nostalgia, and of course, live campfire stories from me, Susto. I'm really excited for this. I'm a little bit nervous, but honestly, it's going to be a great time. And if you are in Austin, make sure to come and check it out. Say hi to me, and let's have a spooky time together IRL. As always, if you have your own story, video, audio, photo, anything, send it to me in an email to sustopodcast@gmail.com, in a DM to Susto Podcast on all platforms, or in a 5-star review wherever you are listening if you're able to do so. And if not, that's okay. The easiest way to support the show is to interact on whichever platform you are listening. As always, special shout out to the patrons. You are Liza, Sadie, Rachel, Alejandra, Luther, April, Mario, Eva, Dee, Victoria, Josette, Sam, Angeline, Co, Mandy, Julianne, Karen, Laurie, Jeannie, Monica, Desiree, Anna C, Ashes, Neresa, Rachel, Azucena, Javier, Rios, Ana, Christine, Marlene, Diana, Chata, and Jessica, and Lainey. Woo! Thank you all so much. I truly appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. I will talk to you all in the next one. And do you want to play a board game? Bye.